The Bandypore Man Eater. It was before the days of railways, when the Sigar Pass via Mysore was the only road to Ooty now known as Ooty, and bullock transits the quickest means of travelling. It was a fair road from Bangalore to Mysore, but from thence onwards to Sigar at the foot of the Nilgiris there was nothing but a clayey track, known as a second-class road, with quagmires and pits during the rainy season, in which it was a miracle if your coach wheel did not stick and remain a fixture till help was procured from Bandypore or Mussencoil, the only large villages along this route. Such had been my fate the previous July, when travelling to Madras from Ooty via Bangalore. My transit came to grief in a mud hole in the centre of the road, and in our efforts to extract the wheel by means of a long pole used as a lever, a felloe was smashed. This necessitated a delay of 2 days at the Bandypore bungalow, before a new fellow could be made by the village artisan, and it was while thus stranded far away from the haunts of civilization that I first heard of the Bandypore Man Eater. Having nothing better to do, I had strolled into the village to watch the carpenter at his work, and help with advice as to the repairs of the transit, and was soon in friendly converse with the villagers who crowded round the Durai gentleman. Had the Davru heard of the Pil, tiger, Peran Pili, large tiger, which was living on them and on their children, and their cattle? Puja, propitiatory ceremonies, was of no avail. The devil of a tiger had even carried away the pujari, village priest, and now, no one was safe. They could not go to the jungle for firewood, and bratties were consequently getting dear. Would the Durai stay a day and try and shoot the brute? His children, the motley assemblage around, would be grateful forever. The Durai had nothing better than a six-shooter, a kind of travelling companion, with which to try conclusions with the monster if met with carrot, and as he did not like to add himself to the already long list of those the brute had killed and eaten, he, with many expressions of what he would do if he had the weapons, gratefully declined the offers of those who volunteered to lead him to the edge of the forest the tiger haunted, and leave him there. On my return journey to Ooty some 8 months after, I again found myself delayed at Bandypore, and this time because the transit drivers refused to drive through the Tipu Kadu, as that portion of the forest was called, as 2 transit drivers had been carried off from their coaches only a few days before by the man-eating tiger. At the bungalow I found Messrs. K and Ward, the government tiger slayers. K and I frequently met later on as a successful coffee planter on the hills, and a better shot or a more fearless hunter I have never seen. Ward belonged to the 60th Rifles, then stationed at Ooty, and had been specially selected for his keen shikar instincts to exterminate the tigers which then infested the Nilgiris. I have lost sight of him for many years, but I am told that he left the army and joined the Madras Railway, where he did right good work. He had so happy a way of relating his shikar experiences, so little of the ego in him, yet so full of dash, that the long evenings seemed to fly while listening to deeds of daring unrecorded in printer's ink. If ever he writes his experiences of jungle life, his will be a book worth reading. K and Ward had heard of the Bandypore Man Eater and were now collecting information on the spot, and finding out its favorite haunts. They had already been out a couple of days, but had not succeeded in coming across it, and had only heard that morning that a coolie on the Moyar coffee estate, some 15 miles away, had been carried off the previous day by the brute, and they were now hurrying to get off while the scent was warm. I had a new Wesley Richards with me, a recent purchase in Madras, and was anxious to try its qualities on big game, but the time at my disposal was not enough to permit of my joining them. In such company I believe I would have faced a dozen tigers, as both were deadly shots, and as cool could be under the most exciting circumstances. Wishing 'em all success, I saw 'em off and then went on to the village to induce the transit drivers to supply bullocks for the next 2 stages, there being none available at the station 5 miles off, the men having deserted owing to fear of the tiger. I pointed out to the men that with 2 such noted shikaris as K and Ward before us there was nothing to fear, as they were certain to account for the tiger if it was about. After much persuasion I managed to procure 2 drivers and 2 sets of bullocks, one to yoke to the coach and the other to follow behind, to drag from the next station. It was about 4 in the afternoon when we set out, my servant on the box beside the driver, and the extra pair of bullocks trotting close behind the keeper at their heels urging him on. To inspire confidence I had my double Wesley Richards in my hand, having carefully loaded it with an extra charge of powder, ready for contingencies. Keeping a bright lookout ahead, we were jogging along in the hot sun and amid clouds of dust, and hoped to get to the changing station in a few minutes. I had been chaffing the driver as to the man-eater, and asked him where it had got to. Was he alarmed now, and had he not done wisely in coming with me? When suddenly, with a snort of alarm, the bullocks behind the transit galloped to the front and went tearing along with tails erect. Turning to learn what had alarmed them, I saw an enormous brute of a tiger slouching off in the brushwood beside the road, with the unfortunate bullock driver in its mouth. It held him by the neck and his legs were dragging on the ground as it was stealing off. I rapidly cocked my rifle, and placing the stock to my shoulder took a rough aim and pulled off both triggers, as I hoped that even if I missed the tiger, the sudden report would make him drop his victim. Snap, snap, went both barrels, and I found I had not capped the gun. This was in the days before breech loaders were in common use. By this time, the bullocks yoked to the transit had also taken the alarm and were dashing away after their companions, and no amount of tugging at the reins would stop them in their wild flight. It was fully a mile before they could be brought under control, and then no amount of persuasion or threats would induce either my servant or the driver to go back with me to try and recover the body of the poor fellow carried off by the man-eater. That he was dead, there could be no doubt, as his neck must have been broken by the first bite of those tremendous jaws. Probably the brute would have begun his gruesome meal ere this, but still there was a chance of recovering some portion of his body. The next best thing to be done was to hurry on and try and overtake Messrs. K and Ward and bring them back to the scene of this dreadful adventure. I felt that I had indirectly been the cause of the man's death, as it was my representation that had induced him to come with me. We hurried on till we came to a small hamlet on the southern skirts of the forest, the inhabitants of which had securely fastened their doors at dusk, as this tiger had been known to enter a village and carry off a woman who was drawing water from a well. We learned from the villages that the government tiger slayers had left the road and taken a short cross-cut to Moyar. While in converse with the villages, a transit from Uti drew up, and in it were two officers of the 6OTH rifles on their way to Bandypore to look up the famous tiger. My tale was soon told, and after a hasty meal we set out for the spot where the driver was carried off. We had to do the driving ourselves as the natives were too frightened to sit on the box alone. We camped at the deserted transit station and were out betimes next morning, but nothing could be found of the body, nor were there any traces of the tiger. We searched all that day and part of the next, but no tiger, nor any signs of the unfortunate man's body could we see. Leaving the officers to continue the hunt, the transit was once more turned to the Uti direction, I driving, and my servant inside. The driver had decamped the previous day. I was in hopes of getting a change of bullocks and new driver at Siga, and was driving along slowly when we arrived at a large stream, the Moyar River, about 2 in the afternoon. My servant asked me to stop a little as he wished to obtain a drink at the river. There is a fine masonry bridge of several arches over the stream, and on this I stopped the coach to allow my boy to quench his thirst. He had barely been away a minute when he came hurrying back, and in a trembling voice told me the tiger was in the river with all his body in the water, and merely his head out. Telling him to hold the bullocks by their nose strings, I got my Wesley Richards, this time careful to see it capped, and stealing to the parapet and peeping over saw, sure enough, the enormous head of a tiger just protruding out of the water. Luckily it was looking in a direction opposite to that from which we had come, and the noise of the stream had prevented its hearing our coach wheels. Taking careful aim at the head, I fired, keeping the other barrel ready if I required to use it. With a convulsive movement forward, that brought its body half out of the water, the tiger fell never to rise again, the ball having gone, as I afterwards saw, clean through the brain. Waiting for some time to make sure the beast was not foxing nor merely stunned by the shot, and finding no movement in the body, we unyoked the bullocks and fastened them to a tree, and then went down to examine my kill. It was a magnificent male tiger, one of the largest I have seen, and in splendid condition. There were no marks of mange about the skin to show that it was a man-eater, the popular idea being that eating human flesh causes the tiger to become mangy. This, like many other popular beliefs, is incorrect, as I learned by later experience, some of the finest skins being those of man-eaters. With the greatest difficulty I and my servant were just able to drag the body out of the water, and there I had to leave it till my servant returned with a cart from Siga. The villagers of Siga on arrival pronounced the tiger to be the man-eater of Bandypore, but this I was not inclined to credit, as I then believed in the mange theory. However, I allowed him to carry the body in triumph to Siga, where certain ceremonies were performed by the village priest over the dead tiger's body. On careful measurement before skinning, the length from tip of tail to snout was 10 feet 2 inches. After skinning, the length was nearly 11 feet. I wrote to the collector of Coimbatore relating the circumstance of the kill, and some 2 months later received a letter of thanks and a government reward of 200 rupees for having unwittingly shot the man-eater of Bandypore.